we've talked to a lot of neighborhoods who are kind of like, oh, we don't want this in our backyard. Then we talked to some of the poorer neighborhoods who sort of felt like they
get more of
Yes.
it. Yes. So this is, again, for my ward, so I represent Ward 7, and that includes Whitaker, Train Song, some of Highway 99. We have a number of social service agencies already located in my ward, and that has to do historically with the ability to purchase land and where's land affordable for social service to purchase. But that also has meant that the surplus land that the city has available has also been in my ward.
Right.
And in fact, very close in. So, sponsors, the St. Vincent de Paul Access Center, Looking Glass, Shelter Care, they're all in my, not just in Ward 7, but in a fairly close proximity to each other. And so are all these rest stops. So, I have let my fellow counselors know, and they also all know that I'm very compassionate about this issue and want to do things to help and find alternatives, but I've made it clear that I can't support locating any more rest stops in Ward 7. We've just, Train Song in particular has absorbed all of the ones we have now. And now we're butting up into River Road a little bit with the two newest ones. And it's just time that we need to have some, if we're going to place more, which we may not do, but we need to be looking to other wards to take up some of this challenge. And then our second pilots are the rest stops, which haven't had quite as much opportunity to get set up and demonstrate their effectiveness. These are really emergency shelter spots. The idea was to create safe places for people to sleep, to leave their things, in the hopes that having that stability just in terms of a safe sleeping spot would provide them with the wherewithal that during the day they could continue to do what they needed to do to improve their situation and at some point not be sleeping in essentially a legal campsite.
Right.
So those pilots haven't had as much time to really demonstrate what their positive or negative attributes are. So those have been extended to October of this year in terms of a sunset date. And some time before that sunset date, council will look at those pilot projects, both Opportunity Village and the rest stops, and assess kind of what they've accomplished, where they've maybe not been as successful, and do we want to change them or end them or replicate them somewhere else in the city. So the original idea, as I mentioned before with the rest stops, was instead of a wholesale lifting of the camping ban in our public spaces, we would create legal campsites or rest stops, places where someone could have respite from being an illegal camper, basically. But we also then wanted to limit their size, and we would be happy to authorize one on a piece of county land or private land, but we haven't had anyone step forward to make that offer. So far they've only been limited to city property. And the council gave the city manager the authority to enter into an agreement with an organization. It could be a nonprofit, it could be an individual or group of individuals, who would be responsible for managing the site. And so far, Community Supported Shelters is the organization that has stepped up to manage the two approved sites. And they get to set the rules in terms of how, what the hours of the site are. Can people stay there during the day or not? Can people, we did say, the council said you can't use alcohol or of course illegal drugs in the site. But the management authority could also say, you must be sober in order to be in this site, or they could say, we don't have a requirement around that.
I know when we talked to the Opportunity Village people, they talked about how they were looking at the possibility of having to move after the city has sort of assessed these programs.
Mm-hmm.
Is it likely that they're going to have to move? And I know that you said that there really haven't been any takers from private or county land. So where do you really see them being able to go after this?
I still think it's a challenge. I think actually Opportunity Village, because of the nature of that establishment, has a lot more potential for another agency or a private party offering some land to them. I also think there's potential for the city council to consider extending their allowance to stay where they are now. I don't believe that the city has any plans for that property. So I, for one, would be advocating to allow them to stay, and if they wanted to open a second opportunity village elsewhere that they were able to find a piece of land to do so, that would be great. But it has been a real challenge to, and I haven't been involved directly with working with the county or any of the other agencies. EWEB has land, Union Pacific has land, the state has land. But in terms of the rest stops, I think because they're very untested pilot program, that people aren't eager to invite a rest stop to open up. Where we have had a little more success is with the car camping program, which of course requires a vehicle and is limited, I think, to 3 cars or Conestoga huts on a site. And we do have some private property owners who are hosting Conestoga huts or RVs, and then the city, I think, provides a porta potty and some garbage collection for those sites. So we've got some churches and we have some private property owners who are participating in the car camping program, so that's great. There seems to be a lot of energy gathering to think differently about how we provide services to people who are experiencing homelessness, and moving towards more fully embracing the Housing First model, which essentially says, instead of requiring someone to meet a certain criteria and enroll in a number of programs and jump through a bunch of hoops before they're eligible for housing, provide them housing, get them off the street, put them in an apartment, pay for the apartment through various means, federal grants, individual contributions, and then allow that person to avail themselves of support and programs and medical care. And what they are finding in communities that have been taking this approach to heart is that emergency room visits are reduced, chronic police activity is reduced, people may not become clean and sober, which for some taxpayers is very grating. It's, public policy, it's a challenge. But in just adding up the dollar figures, the cost to keep that person housed in, not a fancy apartment, just, a mid-level, low-level apartment, versus the expenses of public safety, public health, and the other costs that person brings to the taxpayer, it's no argument that it's cheaper to house them.